Welcome to Talks with Summer, seeing the world through the eyes of another. Today I have with me Elizabeth Jaffee. Welcome, Elizabeth. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Summer. It's great to be here with you. So, yes, I'm Elizabeth Jaffee. I am the owner and director of Gallery Article 15. We are an art gallery based in the Georgetown neighborhood of Washington, D.C., specializing in contemporary Congolese art. And we have a very broad collection of artwork as well as textile products. And we also do a lot of cultural programs to really inform and educate and introduce Congolese culture to an American audience that may not be familiar with the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's actually a second career for me. The gallery we opened at the end of 2022, so it's still relatively new. Prior to that, I was a foreign service officer with the U.S. Department of State. And so it was a big shift, leaving government service, which really had been my life for many, many years, and I loved very much, to really taking on a whole new career by opening up the art gallery.
So before I ask you more about that, I wanted to ask you, where did you grow up? Tell us a little bit about your childhood days.
Sure. So I grew up in Princeton, New Jersey, which, as you probably are aware, is a university town. My father was a professor at the university. My mother was a writer. And it was really a wonderful community to grow up in. And I know there's a perception of Princeton as very elitist and fancy and snazzy at the time. And that is true. At the time, though, when I was growing up, it really was a small town. It was a small academic town. And that really, for me, was a wonderful way to grow up because it was very safe. We knew our neighbors. The kids would just get together on our bikes, go off, and just be home for dinner. And so it really had that small town feel to it. But at the same time, being a university town and an academic town had sort of a very international feel and a lot of exposure, therefore, to different ways of thinking, as well as people from all over the world. The other thing about Princeton is that it is located, it's an hour from New York City, it's an hour from Philadelphia. So it also, even though it was this small town, was very close to very, very major cities. So we were able to, and that was a big part of my childhood growing up, was going into New York and being able to go to museums and the opera and experiencing all of that, on a really regular basis, because it was easy to hop on the train and get to New York for the day. Yes. So it was in many ways, I think, obviously not idyllic in all ways, but in terms of the environment, it really was a very, very nice place. And I think really did have a very positive impact on me as an adult and my interests later in life.
So what brought you to Washington, D.C.? Was it the Foreign Service? And how did you end up getting into the Foreign Service eventually?
So it was a very circuitous route. It was not a straight line. I had actually, my undergrad degree is in comparative literature and theory with a concentration in French, but also Italian. And that was really my focus as a very young person, and including emerging after college. I had spent several summers studying Italian while I was in college, and had originally, directly after graduating from my undergraduate, went to Paris with the plan of getting a master's degree in art history. So there's a little bit of full circle in terms of my interest in art history, which had always been a very strong interest of mine. But that was the plan. And I was in Paris, and everyone said, well, that just must be amazing to be in Paris. And yes, okay, it was, because Paris is amazing. And this was really a great opportunity. But I just realized it wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. And I really wanted to work on economic development. And it sort of goes back to a summer I had spent doing volunteer work in Jamaica, and this sort of long-standing interest in particularly Haiti, but more broadly, development work. And people were very critical at the time, but I said, I want to move to Washington. I had a lot of friends here, which is a lot of young people in the US, obviously, after undergrad come to Washington, D.C., but it was also seemed like the obvious place to start looking for jobs in international development, international affairs. And so I went to the Cleveland Park Library, because this is pre-internet, and looked up every organization in Washington, D.C. that worked on Haiti. And I found a small NGO and did an internship and ended up getting hired on as staff. And that led to another job. And that really solidified that this is what I wanted to do with my career and my life. I went back to graduate school to get a degree in international affairs and economics. And then because of my work on Haiti, I became really fascinated with Africa and conflict in Africa, development in Africa, and really then realized that was where I was leading, and took the Foreign Service exam, passed, and joined, and that was it. And that's what then I did for the next 20 years. So it really, as I say, it wasn't a straight line. It wasn't that I had, as an undergrad, gone to Georgetown knowing this is what I wanted to do. It was very much a circuitous route that in some ways comes full circle in terms of all of my interests, which I think is really, actually, I'm glad I did it that way, to be honest. I think it really has advantages.
So your gallery is specializing in Congolese art. Was it because you were there and spent a lot of time in that part of Africa, or can you tell us a little bit more about your gallery and why your interest, especially in Congolese art?
Sure. And it is actually the single most frequently asked question of visitors to the gallery. And I think it's because there aren't any other galleries in the United States that specializes in contemporary Congolese art. So it is really unusual and unique. The answer is yes. It grew out of having served at the American Embassy twice, as well as working in Washington on the Democratic Republic of Congo, and really loving the country. So there was that. I also served in 3 other African countries, but it was really the Congo and the art in the Congo that really, really stayed with me. And I started collecting art there. That was when I really started becoming a serious collector in terms of contemporary African art back in 2008. I'm still working with some of the artists whose artwork I bought way back then. One is actually my house, that the artist was here in October, which is really exciting to have that sort of long connection. But the second reason is really, so it was one that's where I started collecting art. It's where I really felt, a lot of love for the artists and the community. But at the same time, I also always felt the art was really extraordinary, really special. And so when I left the Foreign Service, I knew it was something I wanted to do to remain engaged with the Congo, but in particular, the art and the artists, because I felt it was so exceptional and yet so unknown in the United States.
Thank you so much. As an artist myself, I can say that the art is so beautiful and the colors move me so much because I love color. I use a lot of color in my art personally, and to me, it depicts a lot of feeling.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is one of the things I also really love about the art is how colorful it is, how joyous it is,
yes,
how humorous it is, that despite the numerous challenges in this country, that there still is so much joy that comes through in their art.
Yes. And I feel it takes a lot of courage to use so much color in your art and all the strong colors all together to display that emotion.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But it is really typical. But yes, it is, as I said, one of the things I actually find most appealing in terms of the art is how bright and colorful it is.
So I'm going to move on to the next question. We might have covered it, but I'll still ask it if there's something else you would like to add on. And that is, what is something which is very close to your heart, or what is something you're passionate about?
Well, I mean, I obviously the gallery right now is sort of my biggest passion. I think one thing I've learned is that as a first-time small business owner, it is very easy to get that become one's entire life. And, there are a lot of challenges in the Congo right now in terms of the conflict in the East. And these artists I'm the only one they know in the US. And so there is a lot of pressure. And while at the same time being a really wonderful, passionate part of my life, I try, not always successfully, but I try to also have other things that I'm passionate about. And certainly my dog. I've always been a big dog lover. I think you are too. Um, and I really think, particularly just given all the stress and everything going on in the world right now, being able to just even go for a walk on a rainy day with my dog, go to the dog park, that I've had dogs ever since I was a child. As an adult, there were only a couple years of my life I dragged my dogs all over Africa back and forth. So I would say certainly that. I mean, that also brings me a tremendous amount of joy. Being with my dog, being at the dog park and just seeing just the love of these animals and also the owners, how much love there is between these dogs and the owners. So that, and tennis, which I know you're also a tennis player. I'd say it's my other, and that, I picked up as an adult because I played team sports growing up, and it was hard to find a field hockey team to play on and bad. And I was terrible at golf. I hated it, but the tennis I absolutely loved. And so it's also very social. So I love going to tournaments. I love playing. I love the people I play with. So as I say, finding that balance is really hard as a small business owner, particularly where I feel like a lot of people, these artists depend on me, but I do try and do other activities where I do, which I also really deeply love, such as tennis and being with my wonderful pug dog. So.
Thank you. And I would like to go off on a tangent and ask you one more question, which is very important to me also. And that is that as a strong woman who has built her own business, and you've done so much in life, traveled all over the world, what would you like to share with women out there, and what would you say to them to motivate them? Because there's always struggle in this. There's so much inequality and there's so much struggle. So what would you like? What's your advice to us?
No, and I do think, I mean, it is really difficult for women. And I think for me, the sort of my advice would be to really follow one's passion, but also at the same time, as a very young person, don't feel like if you don't know what that passion is, or if you need to change, that the expectations that others have of you, if those aren't really what your expectations are for yourself, you can change that. You can change that. And it may not happen immediately. And it may be that at the current moment, you aren't in a position, but even just reading books, learning about things because it's something that you feel passionate about, with the idea that maybe right now I can't make that career change, but in the future, it's something I can work towards. So I think that's really, really for me was, the criticism that I got when I left Paris, but knew it was the right thing. It was hard, but I knew it was the right thing for me. And, looking back on it now, people are surprised that I was ever a comparative literature major, but I'm glad I did that. And so I think the other two pieces of advice I'd say is one, the patience, that particularly for young people, I feel like and maybe it's because of technology, that people have just become very impatient, that it takes time. It takes time to build a career. It takes time to build a resume. It takes time to build knowledge. And so, take the steps, that because those foundations at the end of the day, even if it's something completely different than what you end up doing with your career, like owning an art gallery, that comparative literature, the books that I was exposed to, the theories that I was exposed to, those months in Paris where, because I speak French now, has been useful. All of those experiences can actually end up being extremely useful, but they only happen if you take things step by step by step. And so, I think patience, passion, and just really believing in oneself at the end of the day and trusting one's own instincts. And I think for a lot of women, sometimes there's a lot of noise and the expectations, and as opposed to really listening to one's heart and knowing, that trusting oneself and feeling confident in one's decisions.
Who has been the most influential person in your life, and how have they impacted you?
That's interesting because I've had so many interesting people throughout my career. I mean, I'd say probably the person who's influenced me the most has really been my brother. We're 15 months apart, so grew up really almost like twins. He sadly passed away a few years ago, but we were always very close. And I think the shared experiences that we had just being so close in age growing up, but also just he as a person just was so unbelievably warm and funny and just dependable. He was sort of somebody, who was just always was going to be there for me, and the importance of family and just the joy that he had being with his family, his children, with me. We did a lot of vacations together after our parents passed with the kids. And it was just, he really just was always there. His presence was always there, even when we were thousands of miles apart. And I think in that way, just that impact and just really, it does remind me of wanting to be that warm and that kind to other people, because that was really who he was. And so funny, just so funny. He's sort of in a special category. Obviously, there have been numerous people, ambassadors I've had, colleagues I've had, friends I've had. I think, I've been really lucky in the people that I've been surrounded with growing up, but also certainly in my career at work. I've had wonderful, wonderful colleagues and mentors.
Is there any advice you would give your younger self looking back at your life now?
Maybe be more patient. I'm not a very patient person. I was, in the sense that everything back then was a little bit slower. Yes. Just because of the lack of technology and that. But, I think just that sort of the advice that I would give somebody now is advice I would give myself as well, which is, just trust yourself and having the confidence, which I did at the end of the day, but maybe feeling more confident when I took those decisions that, hey, this is the right thing to do, but also knowing, if it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world, because at the end of the day, you are really young. And it is funny because I didn't feel like I was that young at the time. And now when I meet people who are that young, I think, wow, you have no idea that you have so much ahead of you and so much time. But that sort of patience and sort of feeling confident in decision-making would have maybe made it less stressful and maybe allowed me to just have more fun at a time in life where that one should be able to enjoy life. The cliche, the expression, youth is wasted on the young. I mean, there is some truth to that. It is very hard. As a young person, you're going through a lot of changes. So, I'm not sure how easy the advice is to follow, but in general, to be honest, I'm pretty happy with the route I took and where it ended up. So, which is kind of a nice feeling.
What do you feel the purpose of life is for you? Or in other words, what do you feel is your personal quest in life?
That's a deep question. I'm not a very spiritual person. I'm very much a sort of here and now, present. And I do really feel like, we are given a very limited time on this earth together. And so we really should make the most of that. And to me, that means helping others, being kind to others, supporting others. I think personally, right now, I'm obviously very committed to helping these artists and really having them be able to have extraordinary full careers, which is hard for artists everywhere, but it's particularly hard in the Congo. And to feel that, I am really contributing to that. That makes me feel very good to think that I am actually contributing to these young artists being able to go on and have really successful full careers and have the gallery be successful. But I don't think I have this is my one and main goal in life. I think really I would like to have a fulfilled life, a balanced life with friends and dogs and tennis and the gallery, as opposed to, having, I'd say my mission is kind of a little bit different than maybe when I was younger and thought, I'm going to be an ambassador and I'm going to do this or this or this. Now it's really, I think about, okay, let's have a successful gallery where these artists are doing well, where the community, I love the local business community, where we're all doing well, and really just being able to really spend time with my friends and family and enjoy all the advantages and really privileges that those of us who live here in Georgetown enjoy.
Is there any book, quote, or philosophy that has shaped your outlook on life?
Well, as I said, I'm not, in terms of philosophy, I am very much a sort of here and now. We shape our futures. We shape the future of the planet. The actions we take really are what are going to make the future. So in that sense, that's sort of my philosophy. In terms of books, growing up, as sort of a young adult and even till now, I've always been really struck by Doris Lessing and her Children of Violence series with Martha Quest and A Proper Marriage, and sort of the character who, even though, very different circumstances growing up in colonial Rhodesia, but it really is also talking about a woman and her choices and the choices that she makes as a young person and not necessarily doing what was expected. And sometimes that was in sort of a negative way and sometimes in a positive way. But the books always really, really just spoke to me in terms of finding identity, particularly as a young woman in what was obviously a different environment, but in some ways very universal in terms of the themes, and eventually really finding who she was. And it wasn't necessarily what society expectations were or her own as a young person, and sort of the path that also she took, which was very winding to get to where she really found who she was. And so they're books that I've reread many times because they really have had such an impact on me.
If it were an ideal world, what does that look like in your eyes?
What I would like to see, in addition to the obvious, right?
Yes.
Peace, end of world hunger. I think right now for me, what concerns me the most and what I want to see, particularly in the United States, really is more kindness. I just feel like there's just so little empathy. There's just, particularly right now, and when I, not to get political, but with the current administration, a lot of these policies are genuinely cruel. They are genuinely cruel. And recognizing, I just would like to see people recognize that we are all human beings and that we're all real people, and generally, and just to try and be a little kinder to each other and not see people as enemies when we're not. We're not at war with each other, even though sometimes
Yes.
It feels like it. But that to me, really right now, given the current environment, I just would like to see a little more kindness towards one another.
Thank you so much. I keep saying all the time that kindness is never wasted.
Yeah, I totally agree. Mm-hmm.
What is something that you would like the world to know about you, which you feel is often misunderstood?
I think I'm a pretty open book. So I'm not sure there's really much about me that if I said would be a surprise to anybody. I think a lot of people know my story. And, I think sometimes people who meet me at the gallery who don't know me from before are surprised at my path to get there, just because it is such a different career, being in the diplomatic service and government service to owning an art gallery and a business. But once I explain that, I think, it's understood and isn't really a mystery anymore. So I'm not sure really. I would like to think there isn't anything about me that is sort of hidden or secretive. I try and be open as much as possible. So it's certainly something I strive for.
From your entire journey in life so far, what would you like to share with our listeners which you feel would be helpful to them?
I think, as I've sort of alluded to before, really try and follow your passion, and recognize that the path may not be a straight line. And that's okay, because all of those detours along the way are going to be helpful in one way or another. And even if it isn't the happiest time, you'll learn from it, build on it. And that's how life works. It's rare that things just go in a way that is exactly as planned. And that's, as I say, I think that's part of life, and sort of accepting that maybe makes the path and the ride and the road a little bit smoother.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's been my pleasure to be able to share your story. Also, because my path in life has not been a straight line, so I'm even more happier to have had this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
To know more about what I do and offer, visit my website, samroshni.com, or find me on Instagram at samroshni coaching. Thank you.